for each team, who you think their top trade bait is and who their top target is. For the Anaheim Ducks, I have Trevor Zegras. He's been in trade rumors for like 2 years. I just think when you look at the Ducks, as I said, you feel like you should be seeing more in them. And they have a lot of young up-and-coming guys, whether it's Mason McTavish, you look at Lucas Carlson, you look at, of course, some more veteran guys like Terry or Vetrano, but they've kind of have that balance, and it just hasn't been working yet. So that's part of it. But at the same time, I think they're going to try to bring in some guys that are also developed in terms of their, I would say, growth. And that's kind of like a Nick Robertson for me in terms of a target. Like, I think there's a few guys out there. Like, I wonder if they're talking to the Edmonton Oilers about a John Gibson, if they look at a Matt Savoy. He's not really like fully developed yet in terms of an NHL player, but I mean, he's shown really well. And then he arrives in Edmonton in terms of the NHL team, and then has a great pass to Draisaitl and shows well. So that's also my perspective for Anaheim. I feel like they still might get younger pieces in draft selection, but I think in terms of getting guys that can play now, Nick Robertson would be an example. The Ducks and Leafs have had trades together in recent memory, so it could be an option there. The Boston Bruins. So I think their trade bait is definitely Trent Frederick. We'll see. I mean, there's other big names there, like a Brad Marchand could be the hot take in this, but Trent Frederick, I really wonder what they see in terms of their future with the newly additions of Nikita Zadorov and then, of course, Elias Lindholm. So those guys just signed long-term deals. Do the Boston Bruins see them in their long-term plan? I'm not sure. But first-round pick is going to be interesting if the Boston Bruins can collect a first-round pick, really fill out their cupboard, because if there's one thing I've gathered from Bruins fans recently is that they're just frustrated with their prospect pool is so poor. Like after, I would say, Matthew Poitras, who's been a good selection, and he's been in the NHL system now. You could look at Mason Lohrei. So there's a couple of guys that have really panned out in recent memory, but beyond that, they don't have a big prospect pool. So a first-round pick would be nice, especially if they're trading Brad Marchand. It'd be a first-round pick, a prospect. Trent Frederick, I think you could get a second-round pick, but it depends on how teams see him. I do think an extension would help, so we'll see. The Buffalo Sabres, I mean, it could be a hit or miss here for the Sabres in my eyes. Dylan Cousins would be the trade bait ultimately, but there's so many other guys that could get moved, from Jordan Greenway up front, Jason Zucker up front as well. Zucker being a pending unrestricted free agent. If the Buffalo Sabres can't re-sign him, that's an option there. Then you can go into the defense group as well in terms of some moves, whether it's Bowen Byram or Connor Clifton, Matthias Samuelsson. So I think the Sabres should be making at least a couple trades before the deadline. Dylan Cousins is probably the big name. I think if they trade him, it could be for like a bigger name too, Elias Pettersson. Or if it's a smaller deal like a Jason Zucker, I could see teams like a Tampa Bay or Vegas giving Buffalo a call and seeing. But I'm sure those teams I just mentioned are also going to be giving a call to Alex Tuck's services. So we'll see if Buffalo would be willing to trade Alex Tuck. I think it would have to be a massive deal. Calgary's been a surprise team. I don't think they're going to move guys away because they're right in the race to make the playoffs. But if there's one guy I could see them moving, it's Dan Vladar. He has like an 891 save percentage, so below 900. The starter, Wolf, has just been a stud. They could bring in a cheaper goalie as a backup. But Dan Vladar maybe could be like a third goalie for a contending team. I just don't think Calgary's there. They might make the playoffs on Wolf's shoulders, but probably could get a different veteran that's cheaper. And then Dylan Cousins, I mean, I brought it up already before, but I guess the perspective for me on Dylan Cousins is two things. One, Calgary's been looking for a younger right shot center, and Buffalo is looking for a right shot defenseman. Well, Buffalo, they definitely could target Mackenzie Weegar or Rasmus Andersson here, but the Calgary Flames, there's a lot of rumors and talk coming out of that organization that they're not going to trade Rasmus Andersson. So unless Mackenzie Weegar would be open to going to Buffalo, probably not Dylan Cousins going to Calgary, but at the same time, I think the Flames will still look at it, and there's other guys that Buffalo could acquire from Calgary. Carolina, so their biggest trade bait is, of course, Mikko Rantanen. I talked about it for a good chunk of yesterday's show, so I don't really need to get into it any more, I would say, in terms of the background. But just strictly, if Mikko Rantanen is not signing an extension by March 6th, March 7th being the trade deadline, we could see a flip. We could see a trade from Carolina to another team. There's so many teams that I mentioned yesterday, whether it's the LA Kings, the Dallas Stars, the Vegas Golden Knights, Toronto Maple Leafs, go down the list. But I could see a scenario. Their top target, I just said Brock Besser because, again, Carolina has been talking to Vancouver a lot. I don't know if they're going to be trading for a guy like Elias Pettersson in season, but again, that would be a hot take. Imagine like Elias Pettersson for Mikko Rantanen blockbuster. Again, I just think Mikko Rantanen would probably most benefit playing with a star again. And I'm trying not to sell Sebastian Aho short because I love Aho, but if he goes to Vancouver, who is he playing with, right? Like, so, I mean, hey, maybe it's a bigger deal where Besser goes to Carolina and there's more pieces coming from Vancouver to Carolina, and then Rantanen goes to Vancouver. Again, when I'm listing these bait and target board lists, they're not a deal. So it's not Rantanen for Besser. It's not these guys. I'm not trying to materialize a trade here. It's just who's their biggest trade bait, who's their biggest trade asset that they might move, and who is their top target that they could look at from another team. And that's exactly what this is for Carolina. Chicago, their top trade baits are probably Seth Jones and Ryan Donato. I couldn't pick between, honestly, one or the other, but there's two different perspectives here. There's a guy, Seth Jones, who's got lots of term left on his deal, and then Ryan Donato, who's a pending free agent. So you've got Ryan Donato with a lot of suitors. You got Seth Jones with some big interest of teams, but then, of course, the concern on the contract. If I had to make a prediction, I think it's more likely Ryan Donato gets dealt. Just based on that scenario. But at the same time, Seth Jones has publicly communicated his displeasure towards the situation right now. He's basically requested a trade. So I think both are very likely, and that's why I included both on the list. I just included a top target of like a Maverick Bourque or a younger player like that. Like I think that's what Chicago's looking for, similar to Anaheim. They're probably looking for the 21, 22, 23-year-olds to play with Connor Bedard now and also play with the team for the next 4 or 5 years. If Seth Jones was maybe going to get traded to Dallas, and honestly, I could see Dallas going after a Seth Jones, Ryan Donato package. You'd have to imagine Matt Dumba's contract is going back to Chicago along with some younger players and draft selection. Maverick Bourque could be one of those pieces going to Chicago in that deal. Colorado, I think their trade bait is probably draft picks. The one other piece I'll say is Callum Ritchie would probably be of interest to a lot of teams, especially if it's a big fish that Colorado's acquiring, like if they were to go after like a Brad Marchand or a Braden Shen. I don't know if St. Louis is trading with Colorado, though. But in terms of top target, I think more realistically, Colorado could be looking at Montreal to make a trade here, whether it's Jake Evans or Joel Armia. I think that makes a lot of sense for Colorado. So keep an eye on Jake Evans, Colorado, and I'll spoil it. We'll get to it. Is New Jersey probably as well. Columbus, trade bait, Damon Severson. Again, there's trade restrictions there, so Damon Severson would have to waive. But I know a lot of Jackets fans want to move on from him, so I think another team might give him a shot. Top target would be Seth Jones. There's been some public words exchanged from Zach Werenski, Seth Jones, other Blue Jackets. I would say people involved in the organization who have talked about a Seth Jones reunion there. So keep an eye on that. Dallas Stars. So trade bait. This one's tough because I don't even say it's like a good trade bait. Matt Dumba's been a mess, to say it lightly. I don't think he's going to be staying with the Dallas Stars past this offseason. So if he stays now, the offseason, they're going to try to move him, I think. But I'm confident that if they do deal for a big, I would say, salaried player, whether it's Seth Jones or Erik Karlsson, I'll also throw Erik Karlsson in as the top target for the Dallas Stars. If that's the scenario, I really think the Stars have Dumba in that deal going the other way. And then, as I said, a guy like Maverick Bourque could be in there, draft prospects, kind of a package like that, right? There's probably going to be 4 or 5 assets in there attached to Dumba, and then you bring in a big player like that. So we'll see. I think Dallas still is going to get maybe a depth player. Like I feel like they always go after a depth guy, whether, I mean, it's been Cogliano or other guys in the past. So again, they've battled with injuries, so I wouldn't be surprised if they get like a bottom 6 forward, but I think the biggest priority definitely is a right shot defenseman. That's their biggest need by far. So Seth Jones and Erik Karlsson make a lot of sense. Detroit Red Wings. So they're in an interesting spot. They're right in the wild card race. But there's been a lot of rumors around them still moving Vladimir Tarasenko. It just hasn't been the fit that they, whether it was what they were advertised to, or just they haven't figured him out in the lineup. I don't know. But I do think that Steve Yzerman is one of those guys that he's probably waiting in the winds, or like in the weeds, I should say, to like, is Elias Pettersson going to get traded at some point? Detroit's probably that quiet team for me. You know what? Vladimir Tarasenko back to the Florida Panthers would make some sense. But I think I was more on that lens prior to Detroit being in the playoff race. Now that they're back in the race, do the Red Wings want to trade in division with the Florida Panthers? Maybe not. But I could see Detroit still moving guys and just bringing in different kind of personnel. And if they make the playoffs, well, they have some gamers on that roster. They have some depth. You never know. And Cam Talbot can get hot. But I think that Tarasenko could be a guy they move. But I think in a move like that, it would either be a second move to bring in a replacement into their top 9 or a player coming back. So maybe it's just a 1-for-1 deal, change of scenery. I could see something like that. If I had to make a hot take, to me, it would be something like maybe Tarasenko and a prospector pick for like a Trevor Zegras. That would be the hot take that it'd be an example of that. Like 2 players changing scenery, trying to get a fresh start. That's what a Tarasenko trade could look like. Edmonton. So their top trade bait is definitely Matt Savoy. I think draft selection, sure. But I mean, of course, all teams want that rising guy. And I think Savoy's right there on the edge of being a regular NHLer. So that makes sense. And then top target would be John Gibson. I think Gibson makes a lot of sense for Edmonton. The rumors were that prior to the season, he was willing to go to 2 teams, Carolina and Edmonton potentially. Edmonton makes a lot of sense. They need a goalie. John Gibson has that experience. I also think he would benefit from playing for a much better team. He's been with Anaheim for a while. So I think that would help big time. The Florida Panthers. So Mackie Samoskevich makes a lot of sense here in terms of a trade bait, but I think they like him a lot. So again, I'm torn. I think Florida realizes they're in their window right now. I think 2 factors here. Do they believe they can run it back this year? And what's Matthew Tkachuk's health status? Because if Matthew Tkachuk could be healthy for playoffs, they also could throw him on LTIR and pull Nikita Kucherov, Tampa Bay Lightning. Obviously, Vegas has pulled it with Mark Stone. They could do that. The Panthers could do that if Matthew Tkachuk is out, potentially longer term. We'll see. I mean, I think Jake Evans makes sense as a target. I think Vladimir Tarasenko makes sense as a target. Again, does Montreal and Detroit trade in division? We'll see. But just based on fit, those guys make sense for the Florida Panthers. The Panthers don't have like a lot of young up-and-coming guys that are not already in the NHL system. Like Sordif just played. Samoskevich just played. Anton Lindell's obviously been on the team here for a hot minute. So again, do they have a lot of guys in the minors necessarily? I mean, I guess guys that haven't dipped their toes, maybe not, but they could trade Samoskevich maybe. LA, Brant Clark. I keep talking about it. Like Brant Clark or Jordan Spence, it makes sense to move one of those guys. I wouldn't trade Brant Clark. I think his future and ceiling is way higher. No shot against Jordan Spence, but I do think that LA needs to figure it out because right now they're right in their window. Drew Doughty is still on this roster. You can't have 3 right shot defensemen trying to battle for minutes like that, in my opinion. So if you want a top forward, Mikko Rantanen would be the perfect target to get out of Carolina. And I'm sure Carolina, if you floated around like a Spence and like, I don't know, there's Byfield rumors going around. I don't think they're legit. We'll see. But I think if you start floating around names like that, it gets Carolina interested. You never know. Maybe a first-round pick, Jordan Spence, another forward, get Mikko Rantanen on LA. That could be stud-worthy. I'll also throw out a hot take that Kevin Fiala, it's been a little rocky for him. So maybe Carolina could give him a shout. But I think Mikko Rantanen, if I had to say one of the teams, that makes sense. LA is one of them. Minnesota, I'm putting Ryan Hartman as a trade bait because a couple of reasons. One, that suspension's rough for Minnesota. 2, I don't think they're overly content about that cap hit for what he's doing production-wise. I would also say this. I think Freddie Gaudreau's also had some good moments. I would have probably early season had Freddie Gaudreau in that trade bait spot. I think they trade one of Gaudreau or Hartman if they go for a forward upgrade. And I think the forward upgrade could be Brock Besser. There's some hometown association there too. So you know what? Brock Besser, Brock Nelson, I think those are Minnesota's top 2 targets. I could have put both of them, honestly. The only reason I put Besser over Nelson right now is it feels like the Islanders are actually trying to lock in Nelson, but we'll see. Nelson or Besser makes sense for Minnesota. Montreal, trade bait, Jake Evans. You could add a bunch of other names there from David Savard to Joel Armia, go down the list. But Jake Evans, I think, makes the most sense. It seems like they're very far apart on contract negotiations. And I honestly think if you could trade Jake Evans and David Savard combined, you're getting a first-round pick guaranteed for that package. I don't know if it'd be enough with Jake Evans and Joel Armia packaged together. I think that probably gets a second-round pick at least, maybe a second and third, because the rumor right now is Montreal wants a second-round pick for Jake Evans, and I think that might be a lot. But I think Jake Evans is a really good bottom 6 forward, a guy you want in the playoffs, right shot center. So you combine Jake Evans and Joel Armia. I could see Montreal getting a second and a third out of a team for that package. A first, well, you're probably going to have to package David Savard in there with Evans. We'll see. I guess just quickly, Trevor Zegras, I've talked about it way too much, but Montreal makes a lot of sense. Buddies with Cole Caulfield. We'll leave it at that. Nashville, trade bait, Luke Schenn. I think a lot of teams want the Schenn brothers right now. Elliot Friedman reported it. A lot of NHL insiders are talking about the Schenn brothers being hot in the rumor mill. So Luke Schenn is a part of a long list of Nashville Predators that could get traded. Lazon could be in there. Novak could be in there. Colton Sissons could be in there. Keep going. But Luke Schenn, for me, it's the Stanley Cup pedigree. It's also the experience. It's also the physicality. He's built for playoff hockey. New Jersey, trade bait, Simon Nemec. I mean, Sheldon Keefe was public in saying that Nemec and Hughes' partnership on defense there didn't work out. Not to say that won't work out in the future or that those two guys can't be part of New Jersey's future. But Nemec has, I would say, expressed some frustrations. So I think if New Jersey was to go for a big deal, I think Nemec could be a part of it. If it's a smaller deal in terms of a second-round pick that they're willing to give up, then Jake Evans makes perfect sense. So I think there's going to be two approaches for New Jersey. They'll see if the big fish are available. My one hot take would be, if you're Vancouver and there's a potential to trade Brock Besser to a team like New Jersey, get him out of the conference, I would push for Simon Nemec to be part of that return. I think that's a win-win for both teams. Besser on New Jersey would be disgusting. Put him next to Jack Hughes, that'd be crazy. But I think the more realistic top target, as I said, is Jake Evans. I just don't know if New Jersey is going to give up those big assets. The Islanders, Noah Dobson is probably the big trade bait, but there's so many other guys there. Like I said, Brock Nelson should be this, but there's been so much speculation and conversation that Lou Lamoriello actually wants to keep Brock Nelson and might float around Noah Dobson. Other guys that could be traded, Jean-Gabriel Pageau. They might try to dump Pierre Engvall. We'll see. Casey Cizikas, maybe. But I do think Noah Dobson is probably the most attractive trade bait on their team. And then reflection of that, if they're trading Noah Dobson, you've got to get a big fish. Elias Pettersson would be that big fish. So it is a conversation for the Islanders. New York Rangers, trade bait, Chris Kreider. I think that makes a lot of sense. Top target. Michelli's been in trade rumors. I think the Rangers would be a perfect fit. Again, they're very much trying to turn the leaf of they still want to be competitive. They still want to be a playoff team. I think that would be the scenario where you trade Kreider in one deal, whether it's to a team like, I don't know, the Vegas Golden Knights, or I don't want to spoil my Vegas section here, but I think Vegas is going to go for a player like that. So maybe the Rangers trade Kreider in one deal and then go acquire a Michelli in another deal. Michelli can play top 6 minutes. He's just been buried a little bit in Utah this year with how crowded their forward group is. I think that will change. So if I'm Utah, I actually keep Michelli because soon you're going to be trading probably Kerfoot or losing Kerfoot. There's been some Lawson Krause trade rumors. There's been some Nick Bjugstad trade rumors. I think Bjugstad should get dealt, but we'll see. I think Michelli is probably the most intriguing for me because I think his offensive output is and ceiling, frankly, is very attractive. So I think that should be a target for the Rangers, but I think Kreider's still probably their top trade bait. Maybe Ryan Lindgren. Ottawa. Trade bait's still Josh Norris. I mean, the injury issues are one thing, but also I think Ottawa wants a bit more of a, disturber center. That's why they extended Ridley Gregg. They're hoping to get that long-term from Gregg and Pinto, regardless of who plays center amongst the two. And then obviously you have Timmy Stu as well. Top target, Brayden Schenn. There's a lot of rumors around Ottawa, Toronto, Vegas being the teams going after Brayden Schenn. So I'm spoiling him a little bit, but in that conversation, I think Brayden Schenn is kind of that fit, right? He's a bit of more of that disturber center. He can play the wing. He can play center. So I think Brayden Schenn would be a perfect 2 or 3 seed for Ottawa going into the playoffs if they do make it, in fact. We'll see. But another guy that's kind of that style and another team that has interest, which Toronto I think does and Ottawa does too, is Scott Lawton. So Philadelphia Flyers, their top trade bait is probably Lawton at this point. I would say Rasmus Ristolainen is a close number 2, but that's up for debate. But I would say Scott Lawton, and this is in direct reflection of the top target, Flyers want a first-round pick or the equivalent. So I think there's been a lot of rumors that the Ottawa Senators want Lawton, that the Toronto Maple Leafs want Lawton. So do you see a trend here? It's almost like if one of those teams I just mentioned acquire Brayden Schenn, the other team might get aggressive in acquiring Scott Lawton. You never know. I do think Vegas is also a team for those two guys I just mentioned. We'll see. The Flyers could make some more moves. The other guy I would say that they might flip before the deadline is Kuzmenko, if they could retain on that or find a team of interest. I think Kuzmenko could get flipped before the deadline. The Flyers just acquired him from the Calgary Flames in the deal that sent Morgan Frost and Joel Farabee to the Calgary Flames. Pittsburgh Penguins, their top trade bait is easily Erik Karlsson. I do think they should look into trading Raquel and or Rust. I think those guys would bring back big value. But in terms of the rumors, in terms of what Kyle Dubas is trying to do, I think he's trying to open up some space for some big business in the offseason. Erik Karlsson would open up that space. So I do think if Pittsburgh's willing to take on some bad contracts for the time being, Erik Karlsson could fetch a first-round pick. But again, it'd have to be like a bad contract coming back. So for example, Dallas Stars. I think you get a legit prospect or a first-round pick from Dallas if you were taking back the Dumba contract and sending Karlsson there. So it's a possibility in my eyes. I think the Penguins situation for me is so frustrating because I think a lot of us want to see Sid chase the cup, and he's just not doing that with this version of the Penguins. San Jose, I still think their top trade bait is Mario Ferraro, even though, yeah, from a lot of different people, it doesn't seem like San Jose wants to trade him. But beyond that, like, who is available on San Jose's side? I guess the one guy that I would say is interesting for me is Luke Cunnin. I think he's got some U.S. development program background, so he's familiar with a lot of American players around the league. So I think there might be a few guys like an Austin Matthews who's familiar with Luke Cunnin. Maybe he goes to Leafs management and goes, hey, Luke Cunnin would be perfect for our third or fourth line. Especially like a Nick Robertson type. He's been scoring a lot lately, but is he built for playoffs? I think Luke Cunnin might be more built for playoffs. That's like a conversation around what maybe Toronto and San Jose could do, but there's a lot of examples around in terms of San Jose. The other one that's interesting for me is Wenberg. But in the scenario where San Jose does not have any retention spots left, which they don't, you can't really trade Wenberg, I think, at this time. But hey, I could be wrong. I mean, I've been surprised more before. I just think with Wenberg's cap hit being so high and there's term left, might not be realistic. But yeah, they're probably going to get draft capital at the very least. But they've made some trades already, so maybe they are quiet. Who knows? Seattle, I think their biggest trade bait is definitely Jared McCann, but you could go in so many different directions here. Are they going to trade Alexiak? Are they going to trade maybe Eberle? Are they going to trade maybe... There's been some rumors about Larson as well, even though they just signed him to a long-term extension. So if I had to go by likeliness, it's probably McCann and Alexiak that make some waves in terms of trade buzz. But I think they try to acquire draft picks. I will say, though, I think they're also in the market for acquiring like that youngish up-and-coming forward. So not like a complete prospect that's 18 years old, but like a 21-year-old that can play with Beniers and Wright for years to come. St. Louis, as I said, Braden Shen easily. So, as I said, Vegas, Toronto, Ottawa, go down the list. There's so many teams going after Braden Shen's services, but he is the captain. And does St. Louis even want to trade him? I think they have to get blown out of the water with the deal. So I'm talking big prospect, probably a first-round pick. That's already a lot, but I think that's what it's going to take to get St. Louis to bite and for that to work. But at the same time, if Braden Shen communicates internally, maybe that moves it along a little quicker. I do think Trev Frederick makes a lot of sense for St. Louis in the offseason, but maybe because they're kind of in the race still, maybe they go, okay, we want to get younger in terms of disturber. Frederick can be that. And I think Frederick could still play center. To me, I think based on what we've seen in Boston, he probably serves more as a winger, but I think he still has the capability to be a center. We just don't know what Frederick is going to be on a new team. Tampa Bay, Connor Geeky's an interesting one. He's been playing more in the minors recently. It seemed like he could be a solution with Tampa as like a third line center, but I think it's just too early for him. But I think he could end up being a trade bait. Alex Tuck would be the big target out of Buffalo, but there's a lot of other guys like Zucker also out of Buffalo, Jared McCann out of Seattle. So I think Tampa Bay is going to look at those guys. Connor Geeky could be part of that package to go the other way. Toronto, Easton Cowan's definitely the biggest trade bait there, but there's also been rumors of them getting interest in Fraser Minton, Nick Robertson, a first-round pick in 26. They don't have their first-round pick this year because they traded that in the Jake McCabe trade with Chicago. Easton Cowan. The St. Louis one makes a lot of sense. So, again, for a lot of this list, the bait and target might not be related at all, but I think for this case, it might be. Like, I'd wonder if Toronto said, hey, Doug Armstrong, St. Louis, Easton Cowan, first round pick, conditional maybe, and then Yarncrow and Camp's contracts the other way. I think St. Louis thinks about it. I mean, Easton Cowan and a first. That's a lot. And again, I think Braden Shen probably only has like a couple more like really solid, effective years in terms of like a middle six guy or even a second line center. But yeah, if you bring in Braden Shen, like that's a playoff guy. And I think Elliot Friedman talked about it. There's a lot of teams out there that have looked at both Shen brothers. I think Trey Living and the Toronto Maple Leafs are one of the teams that have tried to bring in both. I would be very happy in Toronto's perspective to get Braden and Luke Shen on that team. I do think that there's going to be other teams looking. There's a connection with Kelly McCrimmon in terms of junior hockey with Braden Shen as well. So keep an eye on that. There's a few other teams. Like I'm sure Winnipeg's going to go calling St. Louis. I'm sure Ottawa will be calling as well. It'd be weird to see Luke Shen in an Ottawa jersey, but I'm sure they're going to be calling St. Louis in terms of Braden Shen. Nashville, in terms of Luke Shen, I still think they look into moving him, but he's under contract, I still think, another year. So we'll see. There's no rush, but I think Braden Shen makes sense for Toronto. Ryan O'Reilly out of Nashville, like a Ryan O'Reilly, Luke Shen package would also make a lot of sense on paper. But Toronto had both of them, lost both of them to free agency to Nashville. And at the same time, Ryan O'Reilly really communicated his displeasure towards the Toronto media. At the same time, he did win a cup with Craig Berube in St. Louis, and now Craig Berube, of course, is the head coach in Toronto. Utah, I just talked about it. Matias Maccelli, probably the most intriguing in terms of higher ceiling, but there's so many other guys that Utah could trade, whether it's Lawson Krause. I think Nick Bjugstad's actually the most realistic to get dealt. Kerfoot could get dealt. Ian Cole could get dealt. So some of the guys I just mentioned have some big playoff experience, especially Ian Cole. There's some pedigree there. So keep an eye on it. But Maccelli would be the higher ceiling and very intriguing and like kind of also buy low option because he's been healthy scratched at points this year with Utah. Draft selections is probably what Utah's looking at or younger players. Vancouver, trade bait, Brock Besser, and top target, Noah Dobson. Imagine a 1-for-1. We talked about the 1-for-1 in other scenarios before, but yeah, if the Islanders were confident to get an extension with Brock Besser, that could make sense for both teams. It really could. Noah Dobson on that right side in Vancouver, and the Islanders clearly need scoring. Brock Besser would immediately help that. Vegas, the trade bait, Zach Whitecloud. I don't know if what I've heard is necessarily legit, but I do think Vegas, they only have so many prospects, so we'll see. They do have a couple of younger players that are currently in their lineup. Again, the Kelly McCrimmon in connection with Braden Shen makes a lot of sense, and Vegas also acquired Barbashev prior to winning their cup. So there's some familiarity there too with Vegas and St. Louis making that kind of trade. And I mean, Braden Shen, that familiarity with Barbashev also makes sense too. And with Alex Pietrangelo, who's on the Vegas Golden Knights. So I think it makes so much sense across the board for Vegas to go aggressive at St. Louis for Braden Shen. And as I said, there's former Blues on the team as well. So it's connecting all those dots. So don't be surprised if the Vegas Golden Knights trade for Braden Shen is what I'm getting at. The Washington Capitals, Henrik Lapierre makes some sense. He's been in the minors. I think they've really seen guys like Connor McMichael rise where Henrik Lapierre still has a lot of potential, but could also provide value in a trade. Trent Frederick could make some sense for Washington to acquire in terms of a third line presence. And then guys like Frederick and Tom Wilson together, I mean, teams are going to have their hands full with the disturbing abilities there. So that makes a lot of sense. The Winnipeg Jets, their trade bait is their first-round pick. Kevin Shoveldayoff is usually pretty reserved, but I think this is the year to trade the first-round pick. You're in a great spot in the conference. You want to show the fan base and the lead that you can go on a deep run. I think Brock Nelson's probably one of those targets. I think they're going to be talking to the Islanders. They're going to be talking to the Carolina Hurricanes. Imagine Winnipeg going out and acquiring Mikko Rantanen. That'd be nuts. But I think Brock Nelson's probably a bit more realistic. But as I said, I think Winnipeg is definitely going to toss around their first-round pick, see what they can do with the first-round pick and maybe a couple of prospects. Like Winnipeg's also got a lot of good prospects and maybe prospects that they don't see as like a high ceiling. Like Colby Barlow, he's kind of lost a little bit of prospect stock from my sources, but if you package a first-round pick, Colby Barlow, maybe one of your defense prospects, and then maybe, I don't know, a middle six forward, do you call Carolina to at least see what you get going with a Mikko Rantanen trade? Maybe. I mean, here's the thing. Mikko Rantanen probably doesn't sign with Winnipeg long-term. I'm just making that assumption. But I mean, Mikko Rantanen on a line going into the playoffs with Mark Scheifele and Kyle Connor would be disgusting. I think that team could win a cup with Mikko Rantanen. So keep an eye on that. But Brock Nelson's definitely more realistic. That's it. So Give me your thoughts, guys, in the comments. Comment afterwards. All 32 teams, top trade bait, top target. We're going to see what happens on the March 7th deadline. For tomorrow's show, I'm going to go over some trade predictions, maybe some specific mock trades, and I'll also go over the news of the week, the developments going into the weekend, and then maybe some predictions for next week's news and games. So thank you so much for watching. This was John from Hot Take Hockey, and here on Bleacher Report. I'll see you tomorrow for the next NHL Daily. Peace.